The S burned cold beyond the viewport, distant fires scattered across an indifferent void. Admiral Koresh leaned back in his command throne, mandibles clicking softly in thought as another human settlement dissolved beneath his fleet's bombardment. Blue oceans boiled, continents broke into flame, and tiny dots, escape craft, flickered briefly before being swatted from the void. The bridge crew hardly noticed. They had done this 100 times. Colony 7-5 neutralized, droned the sensor officer, his tone flat, practiced. Koresh let the words hang in the air before replying. Another anthill, another pile of ash. What a waste of plasma charges. A few officers chuckled. One compared the humans' defense grid to throwing stones at lightning. Another joked they should keep a few specimens alive for amusement, pets who tell war stories no one believes. The laughter was thin, tired, almost bored. That was the problem with being on top of the galaxy for so long. Conquest had become routine. Koresh's compound eyes narrowed as he studied the devastation on the tactical screen. The humans were supposed to be remarkable for their adaptability. Resilient, clever, resourceful. That was the reputation whispered on the fringes of the Empire. But every battle so far had proven the opposite. Scattered settlements, crude warships, improvised defenses that barely delayed inevitable annihilation. If this was the best the species could muster, then humanity was already finished. And yet, Admiral, the communications officer interrupted, antennae twitching. Long-range scans indicate another cluster of human colonies in this sector. Densely populated. Energy emissions suggest primitive manufacturing, but curiously centralized. Koresh tilted his head. Centralized? That was unusual. Most frontier colonies sprawled outward, half-starved and half-defended. He gestured sharply. Plot a course. Let us end another cluster before they begin to dream of resistance. The fleet shifted formation, dozens of warships sliding into perfect synchronization. Koresh's vessel, the Virex Ultima, led the charge, its armored hull reflecting the cold starlight. The Empire's banners glowed along its sides, a silent proclamation of dominance. They entered orbit hours later. Below sprawled a world thick with forests, mountains, and oceans glittering in sunlight. From this height, it looked fragile, innocent. Koresh scoffed. Another pebble pretending to be a jewel, he muttered. But something was wrong. The orbital defenses were too precise. The missile silos hidden among mountains were not scattered junkyards of metal, but carefully camouflaged fortresses. Energy readings suggested power grids running deep beneath the crust, not the shallow surface lines typical of young colonies. Koresh's claws tightened against the armrest. Strange, he said slowly. The sensor officer frowned at his console. Admiral, scans indicate defensive installations in unusual density. More than triple the standard perimeter for a colony of this size. Another officer snorted. Perhaps they fear the night, Admiral. These creatures have always been superstitious. The bridge filled with thin laughter again, but Koresh did not join them. His instincts prickled. Empires were built on instincts sharpened across generations, and it told him something was amiss. Proceed, he ordered finally. Target their orbital stations. Burn them from the sky. The first wave of plasma bolts streaked downward, dazzling arcs of white fire cutting through orbit. Human satellites erupted in blossoms of flame, raining debris into the atmosphere. More stations followed, collapsing one after another, until the skies looked clear. Then the first trap triggered. A decoy station exploded not outward but inward, releasing a hidden swarm of drones that latched onto the nearest frigate. They tore through its hull, detonating fuel stores in a chain reaction that shredded the vessel into sparks. The bridge fell silent. Koresh's mandibles clicked sharply. Status. Unexpected countermeasures, the sensor officer admitted, voice tight. I detect more anomalies across the orbital grid. It is almost as if they expected us, Koresh finished coldly. A low murmur spread through the bridge. For the first time, officers shifted uneasily in their seats. Koresh rose from his throne, towering above them. His voice cut through the air like a blade. Do not lose yourselves to shadows. They are primitive vermin who dare snarl before being crushed. Remember that. But his eyes lingered on the tactical screen. The defense placements were too deliberate. The silences too measured. And when he ordered ground forces deployed, the landing craft vanished one by one into carefully prepared kill zones. The humans were not scrambling in chaos. They were waiting. Admiral, The communications officer stammered. Ground teams report ambushes, precise artillery fire, coordinated strikes. They are not panicking. They are prepared. Prepared. The word twisted like a knife in Koresh's mind. He barked in order to reposition the fleet, to tighten formations, to strike harder and faster. Plasma fire rained from orbit, searing forests, leveling cities. Massive detonations blossomed across continents. And yet, with every bombardment, more hidden emplacements revealed themselves. Shield grids activated from mountains. Stealth fighters emerged from canyons. Human forces struck with uncanny precision before vanishing into smoke. "Admiral," the sensor officer said quietly, "this is no frontier world." Koresh's mandibles clicked. His chest felt tight. And then came the transmission. It was audio only, distorted by deliberate interference, yet perfectly clear. A human voice, calm, steady, utterly unafraid. "You should not have come here." Every officer froze. The alien admiral felt his heart's lurch. The voice continued, unhurried, as though speaking to children who had finally stumbled too close to the fire. "For years, you've toyed with our outer colonies. You thought us scattered, weak, divided. You mistook silence for ignorance. You mistook patience for fear." Koresh's claws curled, so tightly they dug into his own chitin. The voice hardened, each word a quiet blade. "This world you burn, it is not a colony. It is Earth. And we are done pretending." The transmission ended. The bridge crew sat in stunned silence, as though the void itself had swallowed their certainty. Koresh forced himself to speak, but his voice was lower now, stripped of its earlier amusement. "Prepare for counterattack," he said. "At once." His words rang hollow against the sudden chill. For the first time in decades of conquest, the Admiral felt something alien settle into his chest. Not arrogance, not boredom, fear. The silence on the bridge weighed like lead. Koresh's officers stared at their consoles, their mandibles twitching with unease, as though the human voice had reached into the marrow of their bones and hollowed out their certainty. He wanted to lash out, to call it bravado, the last defiant cry of a dying species. But the calmness unsettled him more than any threat. It was not desperation, it was assurance. "Advance the fleet," he snapped, though the command sounded brittle even to his own ears. "We finish this before they remember their courage." The ships obeyed, sleek war engines shifting formation around the Virex Ultima. Plasma arrays burned hot, missiles primed. They descended on Earth like predators descending on an unsuspecting herd. Only the herd did not scatter. From the shadows of the atmosphere rose ships, sleek, angular silhouettes that bore no resemblance to the crude frigates Koresh had studied. They moved with a unity that was unnatural, as though one mind guided them all. Their engines left no blazing trails of waste, only silent streaks of controlled light. "Contacts, multiple contacts," the sensor officer cried, voice cracking. "Fleet size, Admiral, they match our numbers." "No, exceed them." Koresh's mandibles twitched. Impossible. Humanity could not. The tactical screen bloomed red as human warships erupted from concealed orbits and moon bases, surging forward in disciplined ranks. They did not broadcast threats, did not waste time declaring intent. They simply fired. The first salvo ripped through the Empire's forward cruisers with surgical accuracy. Koresh watched in disbelief as ships that had dominated countless systems were dismantled in moments, their cores rupturing in silent blossoms of fire. Human torpedoes curved impossibly mid-flight, guided by something faster than instinct. The communications officer choked out, "Their targeting solutions, they anticipate every maneuver before we make it." Koresh slammed his claw against the throne. "Counter. Adapt. Overwhelm them with fire." His fleet answered, plasma lances and fusion warheads cutting through the dark. Several human ships were struck, but instead of shattering, their hulls shimmered, absorbing and diffusing the energy. Adaptive shielding. That was technology Koresh's empire had spent centuries failing to master. The human reply came in eerie silence, squadrons weaving through crossfire, breaking apart enemy formations with surgical precision. One destroyer fired a concentrated burst that severed the Virex Ultima's outer escorts in half, then retreated without loss. Koresh felt his heart stumble in his chest. The bridge trembled with each distant detonation. Crew scrambled, issuing reports thick with disbelief. "Their weapons cut through our armor at half the distance. Our targeting fails to lock, shields collapsing on sectors 4 through 6. Koresh's mandibles parted, the word escaping him before he realized. How? The answer came again in a human voice. This time it was visual, projected in perfect clarity across his main display. A woman stood on the screen, her features sharp, her uniform black and unadorned save for a single silver insignia at her collar. Her expression was calm, eyes steady, as though she had been waiting for this conversation all her life. I am Admiral Elena Rourke of Earth Command. Her voice was level, unhurried, carrying the weight of someone who no longer had anything to prove. You've mistaken silence for absence, Koresh. You've mistaken restraint for weakness. We've allowed you your theater of conquest because it suited our purposes. Every colony you thought you broke? A shell. Every weakness you mocked? A mask. Koresh leaned forward, his claws clenching the throne until the metal groaned. Lies. No species can hide the scale of force. We have seen your kind scattered, bleeding, broken. Rourke's lips curved into something not quite a smile. What you've seen is what we wanted you to see. Bait Koresh. You've been raiding decoys. While you burned empty shells we built. We planned. We prepared for the day you finally turned your eyes toward Earth. The words sank into him like weights. The silence of centuries, their absence from every galactic summit, every council, every exchange of technology, suddenly reframed. Not ignorance. Not inability. A choice. You played dead, he whispered. Rourke's gaze did not waver. Because we knew predators like you hunt the weak first. It was only a matter of time before you reached for us. And now you have. The connection cut. Koresh stared at the blank screen, his chest heaving. The bridge crew looked to him, waiting for reassurance, for the unshakable voice that had carried them through decades of conquest. But he had nothing to give. The galaxy's order, the Empire's supremacy, every assumption that had formed the bedrock of their power, it had just cracked. On the tactical display, human fleets moved with chilling precision. They didn't revel in destruction, didn't broadcast triumph. They advanced with the inevitability of a tidal wave. His ships fought bravely, but every counter was anticipated, every strategy dismantled before it fully formed. A cruiser captain shouted over comms, "Admiral, we are surrounded," requesting emergency withdrawal. Another begged for reinforcements. Another reported engines dead, crew abandoning ship. Koresh cut them all off with a single order: maintain formation. We hold. Even as he said it, he knew it was futile. The first breach came when human warships tore through the Empire's center line, carving a corridor straight toward the Virex Ultima. Koresh ordered all batteries to fire, the void erupting in blinding light, but the enemy ships danced through the chaos like shadows. 2 of his escorts fell, then 3, their deaths silent in the void. Koresh's mandibles quivered. He thought of the countless species he had seen fall, of the screams of conquered worlds, of the way Empire officers had laughed at resistance. For the first time, he understood what it must have felt like to them, the helplessness of standing against something vast and merciless. "Admiral," the censor officer whispered, "if this continues, the fleet will not survive the hour." Koresh turned his gaze back to the stars, where Earth glowed blue and unbroken beneath the battlefield. His pride screamed at him to deny the truth. His duty told him to hold until the Empire could respond. But in his hearts he felt it, an unshakable dread. The humans had not revealed their hand out of desperation. They had chosen this moment. They had been waiting. The realization sank like poison. The war he thought he was fighting had never been real. The true war was only beginning, and humanity had already written the first move. As the bridge shuddered with another impact and alarms wailed through the corridors, Koresh whispered so low none of his crew could hear, "This is not possible." But the universe had already stopped listening. Admiral Koresh sat alone in his quarters, the room dim except for the soft glow of the tactical display replaying the battle he had just endured. His claws drummed restlessly against the metal of his desk. He had ordered the retreat only minutes before the Virex Ultima would have been carved apart like the others. Retreat, he could still hardly form a word in his mind. He had never used it in his decades of conquest, and now it tasted bitter, a poison on his tongue. The display looped again, human ships sliding into formation with impossible grace, their weapons cutting through Imperial cruisers as if the ships were made of paper. Every angle, every strike had been chosen with ruthless precision. It was not chaos, it was design. His mandibles twitched as he selected a new file. Intercepted human transmissions pulled from the wreckage of their own satellites during the fight. The language had been cracked easily enough by his analysts, though he now wished it hadn't. He scrolled through video logs, grainy historical footage. He saw trenches filled with mud and bodies, endless lines of soldiers clawing across wastelands under artillery fire. Then came the bombs, great mushroom clouds rising over cities, shadows burned into stone. Then deserts and jungles, guerrillas fighting for every meter of ground. And finally wars fought with machines, missiles streaking from submarines, aircraft tearing through skies, swarms of drones overwhelming defenses. Koresh's chest grew tight as he watched. There was no century of peace. Humanity's history was written in blood and fire, each generation inheriting war like a birthright. They had not been idle in silence. They had been sharpening themselves on one another again and again until conflict became part of their nature. He muted the display and stared at the blank wall. For the first time, he felt he truly understood his enemy. And he was afraid. A chime broke his thoughts. The Imperial Council demanded his presence. He rose, his body heavy with dread, and made his way to the chamber. The Council's image surrounded him in a shimmering hollow sphere. Dozens of leaders from across the Empire, their expressions proud, some mocking, some irritated by his summons. Admiral Koresh, intoned Chancellor Drell, his voice oozing authority. You called us in haste. Report. Koresh straightened, mandibles clicking once before he spoke. We engaged what appeared to be a human colony. It was not a colony. It was their homeworld, Earth. Ripples of derision spread through the council. One dignitary scoffed. Another laughed outright. And this troubles you? Drell asked, his eyes narrowing with faint amusement. The humans are vermin. You have crushed dozens of their nests. What is one more? Koresh's voice sharpened. You do not understand. The colonies we destroyed were not nests. They were shells. Decoys. Earth was silent all these years because they wanted us to believe they were weak. They were not hiding from a galaxy. They were hiding their strength from us. Silence followed, brittle and dangerous. Then a counselor barked out, impossible. No primitive species could outwit our intelligence networks. You seek excuses for failure. Koresh's mandibles quivered. I saw their fleet. They matched us, ship for ship. Their weapons pierced our armor. Their shields absorbed our fire. And their strategies, they anticipated every move before it was made. I tell you now, humanity is prepared in ways we cannot imagine. The chamber erupted in argument. Some shouted for extermination before the humans grew further. Others dismissed his words as cowardice. A few voices, quieter but firmer, called for caution, diplomacy, restraint. Chancellor Drell raised a claw and silenced them all. Admiral, you exaggerate. One battle has shaken you. Humanity is a nuisance, nothing more. We will crush them with overwhelming force. Koresh stepped forward, anger breaking through fear. You think them a nuisance because you have not studied them. I have seen their history, their endless wars with themselves. They do not fear conflict as other species do. They refine it. They thrive in it. To fight humanity is to fight a creature that has never known peace. Drell's eyes narrowed, his voice cutting. Enough. You speak as though they are gods. They are flesh and bone like all others. We will dispatch the Grand Fleet. They will burn as every rival before them. Koresh felt the weight of inevitability pressing down. His warnings were dismissed, his voice drowned by arrogance. He bowed stiffly, though inside he burned. They did not see what he saw. They would not believe until it was too late. When the session ended, he lingered in the chamber alone, the echoes of the council's dismissal ringing in his mind. His claws curled against his palms until they bled. He had never hated his own people more than in that moment, their blindness, their laughter in the face of truth. Later, in the solitude of his quarters, he opened the human archive again. The screen flickered and more images filled the air. Black and white faces, soldiers climbing from landing craft under gunfire, pilots in fragile aircraft diving into battle, commanders shouting orders into radios, eyes hollowed by fatigue, yet burning with resolve. He studied their expressions, their endurance, their fury. He imagined those same faces now commanding the fleets that had torn through his own. He thought of the human admiral, Rourke, she had named herself, her calmness more terrifying than any threat. She had spoken as though humanity had been waiting for this moment, as though the war had already been decided before his fleet arrived. His heart pounded as he whispered into the silence, "They are not prey. They are predators pretending to be prey." He closed his eyes. He saw fire. He saw the Empire's banners falling, crushed under the weight of a species that had been forged in unending war. And in that vision, he saw himself, standing alone, unheard, watching it happen. For the first time in his life, Admiral Koresh envied the conquered. At least they did not have to see the fall coming. When dawn broke across Earth below, Koresh was still awake, staring at the pale blue planet that had already rewritten everything he thought he knew about power. He could almost feel the humans watching back, patient, unhurried, waiting for the Empire to make its next mistake. And he knew the Council would oblige them. The Grand Fleet assembled like a storm across the void, thousands of ships drawn from every corner of the Empire. Their silhouettes blotted out the stars, a wall of steel and firepower meant to remind the galaxy of its master. Admiral Koresh stood at the command throne of the Virex Ultima, surrounded by the hum of engines and the low murmur of officers reporting readiness. He should have felt pride, the familiar certainty that came before victory. Instead, unease coiled around him like a noose. Formations locked, the tactical officer announced. By the Chancellor's command, we advance. Koresh's mandibles twitched, but he said nothing. His protests had been drowned by the Council's arrogance. Humanity would be broken, they had declared, crushed beneath the sheer weight of imperial might. But Koresh had seen Earth's response. He had heard Admiral Rourke's voice. He knew what waited for them. The fleet surged forward, a tidal wave of power sweeping toward the pale blue planet that hung like a jewel against the darkness. For long moments, the void was still, the enemy nowhere to be seen. Officers began to murmur with smug confidence, reassured by the silence. Then the humans arrived. They did not emerge from simple orbit. They unfolded from the fabric of space itself, wormholes blossoming like sudden wounds in the void. Warships poured through in disciplined ranks, sleek destroyers, colossal carriers, swarms of automated drones moving as though commanded by a single mind. Their numbers were staggering, their precision terrifying. Koresh's breath caught. Humanity had not matched the Empire's fleet. They had doubled it. Impossible, whispered one of his officers, but the word died beneath the thunder of the first salvo. Human railguns spat lances of light that tore through Imperial armor as if it were cloth. Drone swarms darted past plasma fire, slipping into the cracks of larger vessels and detonating their cores. The Empire's Grand Fleet, forged in arrogance, faltered under the sudden onslaught. Koresh barked orders, pulling formations tighter, demanding concentrated fire, but every adjustment was anticipated. It was as though the humans had rehearsed this battle 1,000 times before it began. The comms crackled to life, and Rourke's voice filled his bridge once more, steady and unshaken. You should have listened when we were quiet. You should have wondered why we stayed in the shadows. Now you understand. Her words carried no malice, only cold certainty. She was not taunting him. She was explaining a fact of the universe. Humanity had arrived, and nothing would ever be the same. The battle raged on, a storm of fire and steel. Imperial cruisers broke apart in flaming arcs. Entire wings of fighters vanished beneath precision strikes. The void filled with wreckage, drifting like grave markers around Earth's orbit. Koresh watched as ships he had served beside for decades were erased in seconds. Still, his officers fought with desperate fury. Reports screamed across the comms, voices demanding orders, begging for reinforcements, crying out as their vessels burned. Koresh gave what commands he could, but he knew the truth. This was no battle. It was an execution. The Virex Ultima shook violently as a barrage slammed into its shields. Sparks cascaded across the bridge, officers thrown from their stations. Koresh gripped the armrests of his throne, his mandibles clenched tight, his eyes fixed on the tactical display. In the chaos, he felt a strange calm settle over him. He thought of the countless species he had conquered, the worlds reduced to ash, the way he had dismissed resistance as pathetic flailing. Now he understood. The terror, the futility, the crushing realization that survival had never been possible. A nearby officer shouted, "Admiral, we are breached." Fires on multiple decks. Koresh rose slowly from his throne. His voice, though quiet, carried across the bridge. "Hold position." The crew turned to him in disbelief. To stay meant annihilation. To retreat meant disobedience to the Council. But Koresh no longer thought of the Council. He thought only of Rourke's words, of the humans' unshakable patience, of their history of endless war. He realized then that humanity did not fight to destroy. They fought to end the game of pretending. The view screen flickered, and once more Admiral Rourke's face appeared, her calm eyes fixed on his. Around her, Earth's fleet moved with flawless precision, unstoppable as the tide. "Admiral Koresh," she said, and his name on her lips felt like judgment. "This ends here. Lay down your arms. No more slaughter. No more conquest. You know what comes next if you refuse." Koresh's mandibles parted. He should have spat defiance, should have declared the Empire's eternal strength. But the words withered before they reached his tongue. He saw the wreckage of his fleet, the despair in his crew's eyes, and he knew the truth. Humanity would not be stopped. Slowly he bowed his head. His voice was hoarse, nearly broken. "I yield." The bridge fell silent. His officers stared, unable to process what they had heard. The Empire had never surrendered, not once in its history. And now here Koresh had spoken the unthinkable. Rourke inclined her head, her expression unreadable. "Then live. You and your people will have a place in what comes next. But the galaxy will never be yours again." The transmission ended, leaving only the vast silence of the void. Koresh sank back into his throne, his heart heavy with shame, relief, and a strange, bitter respect. Around Earth, the guns fell silent. The Empire's grand fleet lay shattered, drifting ruins marking the end of an era. Humanity stood unchallenged, their 1,000 warships casting long shadows across the stars. Koresh closed his eyes. He could almost hear the whispers of every species his empire had conquered, voices rising from the ashes to laugh at their former master. For the first time in his long life, he wished he had listened. When he opened his eyes, Earth still hung before him, unbroken, unbowed, the galaxy's new center of power. And in that moment, he knew the truth that would echo across every star system in the Empire. The humans had missed every meeting, but now the galaxy would never again hold one without them.